Serious, what are some creepy stories from your culture? From Paraguay, Jazzy Jatir. He's a blonde, beautiful dwarf that goes around naked in the woods. He owns a golden stick that provides him with magical powers. He kidnaps the kids that don't sleep in the afternoon, around 2 PM to 4 PM here, and if he returns them, they're often deaf or mute. Lewisone is similar to a werewolf. The Tuesdays and Fridays nights he transforms into a horrible dog. The souls he takes never go to the afterlife, and that's why he's so feared. Some people think the 7th kid in every family grows to be a Lewisone Pombero, some kind of elf. He is the guardian of the woods and wild animals. He lives in the countryside and announces his presence whistling. If he is your friend, he can guide you through the woods and help you, but if he's your enemy, he can do all sorts of things to you. He punishes the hunters that kill more animals than necessary by making them disappear forever. I'm sorry if it's not well written. I did my best. In Argentina we have El Lobezón, and the only way of preventing the 7th son from becoming one is to be the godson of the president, and we leave cigarettes and candy to El Pombero XD. Don't look up trees when you are out walking at night. A virgin ghost that will suck the life out of you sits up there waiting for you to look up. When a person is asleep, their soul leaves their body. If you paint or draw on a sleeping person's face, their soul will not recognize them and be unable to jump back into the body. Assassination must be really easy in Indonesia. The Brothers Grimm collected stories of folklore throughout Germany during the 19th century. Amongst them are plenty of famous and often dark fairy tales. One example is the famous story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. During the 13th century, the city of Hamelin suffered from a great rat plague. The people of Hamelin were out of their wits. One day though, a stranger in colorful clothes appeared and promised them to rid them of the rats for an appropriate payment. The citizens agreed and promised him a generous reward if he succeeded. The stranger was a skillful piper and played a melody on his flute that made the rats and mice of the city to gather around him. Enchanted by his music, they followed him when he stepped into a nearby river where they drowned. The piper had fulfilled his promise, but the people of Hamelin denied him his reward. The stranger left angrily and without payment. Some time later though he returned and played his flute once more. This time it were the children of Hamelin that fell under his tuned spell. He led them out of the town and into a cave under a mountain. Only 2 of the children returned, one blind, one mute, unable to tell where they had been. None of the other children were ever seen again. There are plenty of variations of this old folktale, but the gist usually remains the same. There was a version circulating among history geeks in Berlin that the town sold the older children into slavery to make it through a tough year, and the story was to cover up their absence. No idea about the validity of this, but somehow creepier than the piper. Small town in upstate NY. There used to be a train station there, back when people actually took passenger trains anywhere in rural areas. Fairly well-off guy, well known in town, comes racing into the station, right before midnight. Seconds later, a huge, old-fashioned, jet black train with nobody aboard, I mean nobody, rolls into the station. No schedule shows a train arriving for another hour, but there it is. Guy runs through the booth and jumps onto the train. Train rolls off into the night. Nobody ever saw him again. There's a song about something like this in the show Over the Garden Wall. It's called Old Black Train, and the train is meant to represent death collecting passengers and taking them away. Plus the show takes place in a kind of forest setting in some old-timey small rural towns. It's not upstate NY specifically, but it's the same kind of environment. Reminds me of this. In Romania, I grew up on a farm and my grandma and her sister were super religious, but they also believed in folktales. This one folktale said that each year on a specific night in summer, forgot the date, sorry, the day of the Sinzine, these mythical forest nymphs would come out and play their instruments together around town. You were never supposed to go outside if you heard music playing because it was their way of drawing people out. My grandma's sister told me this story about a person from their village who was working late on that day and didn't want to go home. As he was working, he heard folk music and the sounds were getting closer and closer, so he hid in a haystack. He then overheard the sound of a string breaking and a female voice saying, "Oh no, my guitar string broke." Then another voice said, "Oh don't worry, maybe that man over there can help," and they apparently took one of his muscles from his leg and used it as a replacement for the string, and since then that man never walked on that foot ever again. This story used to scare me so much when I was little, and I never knew if they made it up entirely or if it was a tale passed on through generations, but it was super creepy. Ooh, I've got some nice ones from de Droevenstreek in Belgium. 1. Toketers, tenensnijdes, who cut off children's toes when they walk barefoot through a field. 2. The black dog werewolf, local variant, who jumps on your back, then you have to carry him to a graveyard where he jumps off. 3. Lodder Medbakit, Lodder with his chains, a BDSM enthusiast who follows you when you're all alone at night, rattling his chains to scare you and being a general dong. Very similar to aforementioned werewolf. 3. Seraput monster, or something similar like Put Doodle. Greenhouse well monsters, a monster that lives under the lid's greenhouse wells and pulls in children, then drowns and devours them. 4. The ruins of a monastery in the Sonian forest that was burned to the ground, where it's said you can still hear the monks' nuns chant in the night. 5. Diogen, the eyes, a phenomenon where you get suddenly enveloped by smoke, see a bunch of eyes and some burning people, possibly connected to the monastery if you look at the description of burning people in the Sonian forest, and a lot of witches, white wives, ghosts, bandits, etc. The wild hunt even made a pass through my village. How to prevent them? Simple. Make a cross, carry a crucifix, listen to your parents and the parish priest, and don't be a child. Not necessarily creepy, but interesting nonetheless. Cuban here. Not creepy, but many years ago, we imported the first mummy we possessed. Since the customs needed to label it somehow, it was labeled as conserved meat, as in food. They weren't wrong. People in my town spoke of dear woman. Origin story differs, but I was told a woman was killed and buried on top of a deer. She would chase people at night and was known to harass motorcycle riders, even going so far as to jump onto the back and ride along while laughing hysterically. There's an old bridge on the outside of town and she was especially known to haunt the area around it. Dear woman. That's pretty common among a lot of Native American tribes, and the myth is that whilst she's generally a benign spirit, she's sometimes similar to succubi in that she sometimes lures promiscuous men to their deaths. The Irish Banshee is a creature that shrieks and wails. You usually see her close to the death of someone in your family. I had this book called True Irish Ghost Stories, and in one of the stories, a guy sees a crying woman and figures it's the Banshee, so someone close to him is probably going to die. He said he hoped it wasn't his wife or children. Thankfully it wasn't, but he heard later that the same day he saw the Banshee, his best friend was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. His best friend was President Kennedy. Not sure if this is universal for my culture, but the nightmare of Lilith. I had sleep paralysis a lot growing up. When you're in your REM sleep cycle, your body is paralyzed to keep you from acting out your dreams. With sleep paralysis, you become aware that you're dreaming and open your eyes, but you can't move a muscle. However, since you're in your REM cycle, your dreams blend with your bedroom. A lot of people report hallucinating a witch pressing down on their chest, making breathing difficult. It's quite a scary experience. So I told my grandmother this, and she told me about the demon Lilith. In Hebrew folklore, Lilith was the first wife of Adam, also made from dirt, instead of from his rib, like Eve. Since they were made equally, Lilith refused to lie beneath Adam. She refused to bend to the will of a man, so she was banished from the Garden of Eden. She mated with the Archangel Samuel, but found herself infertile, and became a wanton, baby-stealing demon in the night. Yes, so my grandmother told me that my sleep paralysis was a visit from Lilith. A fun belief for an 8-year-old to fuel an already overactive imagination. Nanaunui, Stone Man, and Utlanta, Spearfinger, both myths from the Cherokee tribes that were in East Tennessee. Stone Man would devour the souls of villages. Spearfinger would kill anyone who wandered into the forest alone by stabbing them through the neck with her spear-shaped finger. How to thunk it, and then eat their livers. She would then shapeshift into her victim's likeness to gain access to the village and would then kill the family of her original victim, also eating their livers. 3 that I can think of. Rockirakubi was a women during the day, but when they would sleep, their neck would stretch to incredible lengths and roam around freely, drinking either blood or sometimes eating humans. Bake Kujara, or ghost whale, a huge ghost-like whale skeleton that is followed by a flock of birds or fish. They appear on rainy nights near the coastal whale villages, scaring and placing a curse on anyone who sees it. The curse would bring famine, plague, fire and all various kinds of disasters to the village that sees it. Joro Gumo. In Japanese folklore, this is a magical, 400-year-old giant spider that can change its appearance into a beautiful woman. She will seduce young handsome men, wrap them up in her web and eats them. These three are also known as Yauke. The Drummer Boy, Edinburgh. The story says the government found a tunnel that was too small for a fully grown man to go down, so they sent a boy with drums and told him to walk down the tunnel and keep drumming. They followed the sound of the drums and at one point it stopped. The boy never returned. Some people say that if you stand in the right place you can still hear the drums. This is a Mongolian myth. My grandma told me this when we were at the countryside where there's very little human interaction. She told me that after it's dark or you go outside alone while herding, and if you go far enough to not see the chimney of the yurt you're living at, a ghost or a spirit comes, makes you faint and have a seizure. The way you know the ghost is near is when an animal of your herd starts to have a seizure and their mouth bubbles up. If you're fast enough and see the chimney of your yurt, you may be able to avoid the spirit, but most likely, by the time you realize what's going on, you're goners. I don't remember if you die by the end of it or is just left there. Even so, it was a pretty creepy story when she told me about it, especially when it was after sunset. I bet the legend is to help children not get lost by making sure they can always see home. And the part about animals having a seizure might have been tacked on to get kids to run home if crap starts getting whack, like poison gas or something. I'm half Polish, so one thing I've heard of is the Rusatka, water nymph, a woman who was killed before marriage, and if it's an unfair death, or if no one avenges her, she will stay on the earth as a Rusatka who lures men and kills them by doing a dance or a tickling motion. That's all I got. It's Rusalka, pronounced Rusoka, and a similar demon is Paladnika, Lady Midday or known wraith, a woman in white who will tickle you to death if she catches you in the field during the noon. Good idea to keep your kids from getting a sunstroke. I have some stories from the Philippines that scared me when I was a child. Here are my favorites. There's these ghouls known as aswang. Many variations of these ghouls exist between cultures, but what is usually common between them is their ghoulish appearance, long tongue, bat wings, hunting during nighttime, their diet of unborn fetuses, and their salt and garlic weakness, as well as their weakness in sunlight. Maria Labo. She is once a hard-working OFW and a mother of 3 children. She became an aswang from someone overseas, and came back to her home where she supposedly cooked her 3 children and fed it to her husband. Of course, her husband finds it out, and he slashes her face with a labo or some kind of machete. That's where she gets her name. She escapes and runs off in the wilderness, hunting children. Tick tick whack whack, a kind of aswang. Its prominent feature is that it tricks its prey through its sounds. When you hear tick, 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 loudly, they are far away. When you hear it quietly, they are near. Mananangle, also a kind of aswang. During the day she's a normal woman, doing normal things, but at night, she grows bat wings, detaches her lower torso, and flies off in search of pregnant women. The only way to kill her is to either hide her lower half or put salt on it. This way she can't reattach back and will die on direct sunlight. Tianak. It's a baby demon that disguises itself as a lost baby in the forest. When a traveler notices said baby and attempts to rescue it, it'll go back into a baby demon and kill the traveler. White Lady. This is a ghost woman that appears in haunted houses and besides roads, acting as a hitchhiker. She's called White Lady because she wears white cloth during her apparitions. The most popular version of the White Lady is the one from Belite Drive. There are also many encounters of ghosts such as headless priests and Japanese World War II soldiers, as well as a lot of haunted houses. The Icelandic Yule Lads. Basically a bunch of elvish demons that raid your house during the night of Christmas Eve. Basically a bunch of bearded dwarfs. The first one is Stekajuscha, who harasses and kills your sheep. Jiljagur steals your milk and tips your cows. Stoffer destroys your kitchen and steals dirty pans to eat the crust off them. Varalika, spoon licker, licks your spoons and is malnourished. Patalika steals your pots and also licks them. A Skylika hides under your bed and steals bowls you leave in your room to lick them. Skella slams your doors loudly while you're sleeping. Skygama steals your skyer, yogurt. Bjognakrika, sausage swiper, hides in your oven and steals sausages that you cook. Glugagaja stalks you through your windows and steals things from you when he catches you sleeping. Kit Croker has a hook for a hand and uses it to steal your meat. Kurta Sneaker stalks children to steal and eat their candles. Gryla is the mother of these demons that abducts and eats children that misbehave. And of course, Doorway Sniffer, Gatabafa, who has an abnormally large nose to fricking sniff your doorways. He also steals bread. Icelandic Yule Lad seemed like a shitpost from Eric the Red's time. It's either that or there were some locals with very specific fetishes. Might not be well known, but here in Australia we have the Minutes Light. Basically, if you follow or try to catch this guy you were never to be seen again. It is said that it predates European settlement, so it isn't some colonists taking half-caste children at night : We also have the Yowie, which is like the Australian Sasquatch and the Bunaib, an aquatic dog-like creature that drags children and women to their watery graves. There are also various rumors of big cats living in outback. A few planes went down in between World War I and World War II. As a result, these cats were released into different regions of Australia, the most common being the Penrith Panther or Blue Mountains Panther. We even named a football team after them. Sightings were that common. I have heard of instances similar to this all up and down the East Coast. So, I personally this it is likely true. Back when my grandfather was a kid during the 1930s in rural far south coast of NSW, there were sightings for about 2 years of a tiger-like animal in farm bushland. There is a Hmong ghost story about an old couple where the old woman thought that her husband was stroking her hair at night. Nope. It was a weird butt creature with crazy long arms that was reaching through their window at night. They never saw the whole creature, just the long butt arm reaching through the window and stretching way off into the forest. That's why you shouldn't put the head of your bed near the window. Just the thought of being stroked in your hair and then waking up to see that your husband lay with his back against you makes my skin crawl. It's not really a story, but I'm Woodlands Cree, Native American, and we have a strict rule to not whistle when the northern lights are out. 1. Krampus. 2. A legend about a glacier from my region. Some farmers got so rich with their land that they used pure silver as cowbells, bathed in cow milk, and they made their streets from cheese and butter so the devil may have something to eat as well. At some point a poor traveler showed up at their doorstep asking for shelter and they cast him away, shouting, "The devil shall give you shelter." But then thick clouds came towards them from the mountains called the Devil's Horns. They do look like the name suggests, and it started to snow heavily. The farmers tried to make their way down to the valley, but they never made it and their wealth and houses got crushed below the eternal ice. I have a grandmother who is an immigrant from an old country. I'm so freaking glad it was the Netherlands and not Germany, so the only stories were ever about a racist version of Santa and his elf from Spain instead of a demon who steals children. Edit. Naul. Ancient creatures that predates the ancient cultures around here, that walk to this day. Skilled sorcerers that can transform into animals and attack people, steal babies, eat kids, and of course curse you. The Cursed Monastery of Creek. This one is interesting because it's half historical fact. In the middle of the Norfolk Broads there's a ruined monastery. It was originally built by a relative of William the Conqueror in order to atone for the people he'd killed in the bloody Norman conquest of England. However, some years later the monastery was destroyed during a heavy storm. It had been ravaged by fire after purportedly being struck by lightning. None of the monks survived, having had the misfortune to be fast asleep when the blaze took hold. Normally it would be horribly traumatizing for the local community to lose their connection to God like that. However, in the wake of the fire, strange rumors were chronicled among the locals of the nearby village that far from being men of God, the monks had been practicing heretical, satanic rituals. Many of locals even came to believe the monastery had been cursed by God. Much later, under the patronage of a king and against the protests of the locals, the monastery was rebuilt and the ground reconsecrated. But after the rebuilding was complete, the Black Death came to the area and claimed the lives of the monks living there along with many of the locals. So it was abandoned to lapse into ruin once again. Even now, visitors who make their way along the winding tracks to the monastery report a chilling sense of foreboding when standing among the shadowed ruins. Aina was the beautiful sister of Jalkahanan. Jalkahanan, having lost a singing contest to the old man Voinormainen, promised his sister's hands and feet to Voinormainen. Aina's mother was pleased to marry her daughter to such a famous, well-born man, but Aina did not want to marry such an old man, so rather than submit to her fate, Aina drowned herself. She later returned as a perch-taunt Voinormainen in his grief. This is a story from Finnish Karelian national epic The Kalevala. There is also a famous painting of this story by Aleksi Gallen-Kallela. I guess this isn't really all that creepy, but it's the best I got. In Oxfordshire, UK, there's a fairly obscure creature of legend called the Boneless. It's purported to be a sort of protoplasmic blob that ambushes and suffocates travelers on lonely paths. Dang thing made me scared to walk to and from the bus stop. It was a rural area by British standards. I had to walk across a few fields and through a woodland to get there from home, for nigh on a decade of my childhood. I like my blobs boneless. The Babe. Parents tell their children that the Babe is waiting under their beds. When a child gets out of its bed when it actually should be sleeping, the Babe takes it away from its parents. It's never said how the Babe looks like, so that the children can imagine something what they think is really scary. Sorry for bad English. Australian Aboriginal here. We have many creepy creatures because we are many different groups, languages and locations, but there are a few central themes. Where I am from, on Biripi country we call her Durigal, which roughly translates to bush person. She is long and thin but strong, with long hair all over her body. She clings up in the tree canopies waiting for someone to venture too far from camp or their home. She screams as she pounces, and drags her victim up into the trees never to be seen again. A great story to keep us kids in line. Durigal is our version of a broader mythology of the Yowie, the creature that made it into mainstream folklore. There are many different kinds of large hairy bush people creatures. It is believed they are ancestral beings who maintain the proper law of the wild country and hold magic. Elders further south in Winnera country, north of Sydney, have told stories of four-wheelers found tipped upside down on their roofs when the owners return from camping in places that are sacred and where they shouldn't be. La Llorona. If you're Mexican you know her story. If you're not, let me tell you then. La Llorona was from Mexico who had gave birth to twins, but the father left them, so that meant she had to take care of them herself, but she couldn't handle their crying, so she drowned them in a river somewhere, but she didn't mean to kill them, but it was too late, they were dead. Then later on she killed herself, and people were saying that you could hear her in the streets saying Miss Hidges and crying loudly. Most parents use it as a lesson to listen to them or she will kill you. I've heard of La Llorona. I prefer that one guy who whistles, though. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I recall that he whistles a certain tune, and if he sounds far away he's actually close to you. Lake Bowden. It's a lake in Espoo, Finland, and in 1962 15-year-old girls and two 18-year-old boys were at the lake for a night. 3 of them were murdered and 1 of the boys were found passed out and beaten. To this day no one knows who did it. One theory is that the guy who survived did it because he didn't get any pee that night and he was arrested for it in 2004, but he was released in 2005 for some reason. I know this story specifically because of Children of Bowden. Take my upvote. Lalachusa, a harpy who tries to lure you outside of your home by imitating the cry of an infant and scratching your home's exterior. My great-grandmother told us how she evaded one a long time ago while her husband was away gambling. They lived in rural country land, and as she tried to coax her baby to sleep, she continued to hear scratches along the rooftops and windows. She put out her lights and her baby began to cry, but she did her best to keep her quiet. They found deep gashes on the side of her home the next night. Now, in my part of Texas, Lalachusa is just a giant owl that attacks people when they're driving and kills all the electronics in their car. I think it's a valley thing. The story I can think of offhand is from McAllen. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.